So, welcome once again to our Tutorial Thursday segment. I know a lot of you guys continuously tell me,
"Oh, Dan, I need to get better at backgrounds. I'm so bad at backgrounds. I make the cutest anime girls on the internet, but if only I could make backgrounds."
well, it's time to stop complaining. Because you really don't need to make backgrounds. Your anime girls are the best. But if you want to make backgrounds or understand them a little better, I'm hoping that we can get to something today. So it looks like classes here will get started. Just like a real class, we're only 8 minutes behind when we were supposed to begin. So, perspective and composition. You've probably had a very basic overview of perspective if you ever took art in school. But what I realized when going through and thinking out how I was going to teach this, basically, you have to teach composition to teach perspective. I feel like if you don't, you can't really understand the purpose of perspective. And vice versa. If you learn composition without knowing perspective, you don't understand how to create it. And this might surprise you, because I'm sure a lot of you want to delve right into the perspective. Lines, I need more lines to do perspective, lines, horizon, something. But we're actually going to start today with composition. What is composition, anyways? Would anyone care to take a turn at describing what we mean when we say a drawing has a good composition? Or a bad composition, or a flat composition. What is composition? Right? Placement of things into space. You're getting there, failed sibling, but why are we placing things into space? I guess that's my question. What are we trying to make with the placement of the things in the space? Sibling is, I think, half correct. Composition involves the placement of things in a space, but it has a purpose, in my opinion. To make them, make sense together in a place? Okay, what do you mean by make sense? We're getting really close to the answer here, and I'm loving hearing from you. If it's a narrative drawing, then it's to draw attention to a narrative element. Alright, even better. We're getting really close now. I would argue that all good drawings should be in some way narrative. They should express at least an idea. But I'll give this to you. To me, composition is creating and manipulating flow to tell a story. What do I mean by flow? Basically, in any drawing, you're going to have someone looking at it, right? If you look at a drawing, your eyes are going to move somewhere first. There's going to be something that you gravitate towards. If there's a mountain here, and there's nothing else, for example, then your eye is going to look at this mountain, because there's nothing else to look at, right? What if we put in a river here? And what if we make this river move towards this mountain? Now, all of these things are pushing you towards the mountain. And now, what if we put a person here, looking out over the mountain? Now suddenly you have this person who's this journey that our eyes are taking to the mountain reflects the journey that this person could take towards the mountain. Now we're talking about composition. Composition is the creation and manipulation of flow to tell a story. Does that make sense? I'm trying to get to a really intuitive definition here. I want you to think of composition in terms of flow because I think there are too many people who get only the high level of what composition should be. They hear, oh, composition should have depth. Composition should have, perspective lines. You need to remember why we're doing all of this. I'm not sure this is the kind of a textbook word, but I would call this flow. Because it's the flow of your eyes around a picture, right? Where do we gravitate first here? I think you could argue, but I would say it's probably the person, because we generally move towards human-like figures, and then it's the mountain, meaning that if there's a flow here, it's like 1, and then 2, maybe it ends up 3. And everything here is pointing towards this mountain. There should be a movement in a picture. In a good composition, there should be movement. Compare this to, say, I don't know, what's the movement here? Will you say, well, then that's not fair, that's like an abstract picture. Okay. Now it's a door. Hell, I'll even put in perspective. Wow, real perspective. Where's the focus here? The square that get deeper. Right, but here's my point. Where's our eye focusing here? Maybe the door. All right, now where does it go? We're not talking about just focus, we're talking about flow. Oh, our eye goes to the center. Yeah, but we're already in the center. Here's 1, and here's 2. We don't go anywhere. There is no flow. This is a bad composition. Does that make sense? It's boring because there is no journey that we go through when we look at this picture. Composition is all about flow, creating and manipulating it. So, how do you create flow? Well, let's break it down, right? In order to have flow, you need some things. How do you create flow? Any ideas? Alternating space? What do you mean by alternating? Or altering space? How so? Think back to the overviews we just did. Whenever I was drawing out the flow, what was I asking about? A sense of direction. I like that. Sense of direction. I'm going to assert that there's one more thing that we really need. Make surroundings follow the direction of where the character goes or sees. Okay, so you're really close there, Shinxy. There's one other thing. Focal point. There you go. Perfect one. You need a place you're going and a direction that thing is going. Okay? Focus and direction. Now, one interesting thing about focus is it can operate at many different levels. Let's take like a big composition here, right? You've got the character in the foreground, you've got like a character in the background, you've got a bunch of stuff in the dark. I would argue that in this case, the focus could be understood as being like all of this, right? This entire character, maybe even this entire region is the focus of the composition. You've got this huge contrast between light and dark. You've got this character, you could even imagine perspective lines moving us towards her. But the TLDR is, this is the focus, and everything else being dark, pushing towards the light, we talked about this last week, is the direction. And so you might think to yourself, okay, so I need to talk in terms of like a whole person. But that's not true. Say you have a person. I know a lot of you are character artists. Well, now you have this character's body pushing us up towards the face. Now the face is the focus. Say you want to do like a bust. Now you have just this top pushing us upwards again, probably towards the eye. Now the eye is the focus. I guess what I'm trying to say is that focus can operate at many different levels, depending on what kind of picture you're making. but it's always there. If you're thinking, well, I don't really need a focus or a flow, I'm just drawing a face, you still need it. It operates in any artistic realm. You're going to have this idea of focus and direction. Now, let's talk about direction. Something follows from the idea of you need direction, right? You have a focus and it has to go someplace. This is going to tell us something interesting. If you have a subject and it needs to go somewhere, where's going to be the best place to put it in your canvas? I'll even break out the grid for this. We have a new grid now. It's got all the letters, and you can use combinations of letters to point to lines. If you have a focus and you want to move somewhere, where are you going to put it to allow for movement? For example, what if we put our focus here at IJ? Is that going to be better than putting it at, say, LQRK, or even NSTM? Not the center, but why? Why high? Doesn't give much flow, maybe if you're on one of the sides. Now you're getting the idea. Because we want our subjects to go somewhere. This explains why we have the rule of thirds. It's better for them to be on the side so they have distance to cover. If you're in the center, you're not getting pushed anywhere. It is equally tempting to go left or right, and therefore there isn't a strong direction. If you're on one of the left, then there's all this negative space that pushes you towards the right. Of course, if you're in a corner, then there's even more negative space pushing you up in the other direction. Now, of course, there is one question, right? Okay, so we want to give them as much direction as possible. So why don't we put them, like, right here on the edge? Then we'll have tons of space. The thing is, we still need to drive the audience's attention to the focus, right? We need the focus, you need to look at it. And in order to drive someone's attention to this focus, if it's way at the edge, you're literally going to have to push the audience off the page. And you still want the audience to look at the picture. That's why you need a little bit of space, so you can have something that's also pushing it inwards. Does this make sense? Basically, what I'm trying to get at is, this is why the rule of thirds exists. The rule of thirds takes all of the information we've just put together and says, like, if you put a subject, a focus at these 4 points, then you're creating a situation where you can have the space for motion. Does anyone here not know the rule of thirds? If this is new to you, it's crazy important. And just like we were saying, rule of thirds is going to apply at every scale in every type of drawing. All of these can benefit from rule of thirds. Me. Okay, so rule of thirds just says that if you divide your composition into thirds, you're going to create better compositions by putting the most important parts, the focuses that we've been talking about, at one of the thirds. Like, if we assume that this is the whole composition, this is where the focus should be. We assume that this is the whole composition, this is where the focus should be. This is the whole composition, this is where the focus should be, etc., etc. Now, maybe that doesn't sound too, I don't know, too profound, but basically, if you compare a rule of thirds to a hypothetical rule of halves, right? I feel like if you're just thinking intuitively, rule of halves doesn't seem so crazy. Alright, Livy, take care. Yeah, I mean, we'll divide the screen into halves and put everything here, or maybe halfway up or halfway right. The thing about halves is what we were talking about before, right? You don't create strong motion that way. You put something You put something halfway up. Now there's an equal tendency to move it down or move it up. You put something halfway left and right. Equal tendency left and right. So you're going to find it usually is more effective to put focuses in the upper left, the upper right, or the lower versions of those. And ideally both. You see how we're moving from one focus to another? This applies in photography, painting, drawing, all of it. Always think about this rule of thirds. It makes sense now. I'm noting a little. Okay, cool. Question. In landscape art, there will always be a focus in natural settings. I know with human characters, it's easy to determine the focus. With landscapes, it's harder. I disagree, Wen. The thing is, remember what we said before. Where's that direction? Sorry, I missed that. We were talking about focus, and how focus can be any number of different things. Does that make sense? I encourage you not to think of focus as a person. Focus is whatever you want to look at. Let's make a landscape of some kind. I actually wanted to talk about this anyways. Why don't you come up with some kind of environment, any environment. Desert, mountain, forest, ocean, although I'm probably going to put some islands in there. Literally anything. I guess this can go into all the chat too. So the artist would with the coffee be the focus. Yeah, potentially. I mean, you'll see the sketches I made for Wen. In some of them, the coffee is the focus. In others, it's the windows. It really depends. It depends on what you as the artist, the story you want to tell. But yeah, anyone throw out a landscape so I can make this point. I think it is important to talk about this. Forest? Are you okay with the forest, Wen? Okay. Now I want to make this part clear. You do not need perspective to create flow and focus. This is why I wanted to start with composition, because if any of you are feeling like, oh, I can't do perspective, I don't want to try it, too many lines, ooh, you really don't need to use it. It can help. It will help you for reasons we're about to discuss, but you don't need it. Face cam. Okay, fine. Gonna be odd in the YouTube replay. And now, face. Hey guys. We're gonna create a forest composition, right? What do we need to make a composition? All right. So, somebody pick up a focus within the forest. What do you want the focus to be? Waterfall? Love it. Okay. So, our focus is a waterfall. Let's just start with it, right? I'm gonna put it at, let's try this left third. Here's a composition, our compositional space, okay? So, I have this waterfall here, right? I started by putting it at a point that I naturally know we're going to focus at, easily. So, I'm going to expand some rocks, make some clouds. I'm just drawing a waterfall, like that's all it is. Now what? Well, if there's water falling down, there's going to be a river somewhere. And I want to just, I want to point at the waterfall. So basically I want to create this motion, okay? So I'm just gonna, draw out the river that way. It's a river, so I'm gonna kind of scramble it a little back and forth, but I'm generally gonna follow this flow, okay? I want to keep pointing to it. Let's point to it in this direction. So I'm gonna make some trees and I'm gonna roughly follow that, okay? Put in some tree trunks. But the important thing is we have the top of the trees form this motion, okay? Let's do it over here too. I want it to swing in like that. Gonna give him a nice tall tree. Even just this line forms a flow. Now we have this empty space here. I don't really know what I want to do with it. Well, let's think. I still want to point to the waterfall. I want to create contrast that's going to help us point to the waterfall. Let me try. What if we move it? What if we move it down? Well, it kind of moves us away. Kind of moves us towards this focal point. So we don't want that. Instead, let's move it up. Now it's like this huge mountain, but everything's pointing us down in this direction. Okay? Now something should probably be here. It's so much negative space that we're kind of drawn away. So I'm gonna have some more trees. I'm just gonna have some big tall trees kind of moving us down in this direction. Boom, composition. Now, to be clear, my answers are not the only right answers. But what I'm trying to get into your minds is there are vines from the land above. Sure. Let's see if we can't make some vines. And hey, further in the background, let's have some more mountains. And let's make sure that they point down towards the waterfall. What I want to get into your minds is that it can be as simple as, here's my focus, I want things to point to it. So here's our focus, and we can trace all kinds of lines towards it. At a basic level, this is what composition is all about. I want you to follow the flow to where I want you to look. Okay? That, hopefully, should answer the question of what do you do for landscapes. You treat it all the same. It's just about redefining what you call your focus, right? Your focus can be a person, but it can also be like an entire waterfall side, you know? It's all about the story that the picture is telling. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, there's a few things that we derive from this. We've talked before about how a quote-unquote rule of halves doesn't really exist or make sense, but we can actually go one step further in saying that, you know, compare these pictures. You can probably see already which is going to have the most potential for motion and which is going to feel kind of flat or uninteresting. Which ones are going to be flat and uninteresting? Can you figure it out? It's the ones which have the least pressing motion, the top and the bottom middle, because all of these have lots of negative space that they can move through. And these are just kind of like pressed in both directions. This one is terrible. It's pressed in all directions equally. You don't really see any movement there. And this leads us to another interesting point. Not just left and right, but especially symmetry. Symmetry stifles direction. Whenever you have a symmetric composition, character, anything, you want to think about why, and if you really want that. Anytime you have a composition which is exactly the same, it's rough. And you might say, well, come on, man. I mean, you're a person, right? We're drawing people. They should be symmetrical. People have, like, eyes on both sides of their head. They're symmetrical. Shouldn't this be the way it's supposed to be? Well, sure, but, like, your hair, too? Your clothing? Exactly symmetrical? There are so many ways to break up the symmetry. It can be as simple as saying, well, okay, he's wearing a jacket and it's off to one side, right? That's more interesting. The hair, obviously, you know? How about we have it coming in from the other side? Oppose symmetry any way you can. And look, by the way, how doing this, these lines are all pointing us upwards, aren't they? We could make it even better by kind of moving this more in that direction. Akira Kurusu. Yeah, a little bit. Needs the glasses. But the point is, avoid that. Avoid symmetry in everything that you draw. I mean, let's look at it. Right? Let's take a quick look at Persona 5's hot and sometimes eligible bachelor, Akira Kurusu. Look at his outfit, right? Is this symmetrical? If it's not symmetrical, where? Where is it not? This is the protagonist of Persona 5. It looks pretty symmetrical. There's a lot of things that are the same. Although you'll notice the collar and the pants. I think the pants actually are symmetrical, but at least that's a design thing. You'll notice that Soejima, in drawing this, of course, has made it so that we see more of one side than the other. His uniform is symmetrical other than the school badge, right? But, you know, do you think it would look more boring without this school badge? Like, great. Now it just looks like a suit. Yes, so in terms of the design, even built into the design is some asymmetry. But now let's talk about it compositionally, right? Can you trace the flow here? Soejima could have, like, stood him up, like, straight down like this and still had the same character, but even for this simple drawing, this is so much more dynamic. And yes, sibling, it's not really the subject of today's tutorial, but there is a bit of contraposta here as well. So, there's one last thing that I want to point out to you all before we move on. So we've talked about direction, how important it is. And I just want you to realize one thing about direction. Direction can have depth. Direction is not just up, down, left, right. It can be in. It can be out. This is depth. The more ways you can show direction, the more deep of a story you can tell. Now this composition has a direction, right? It's going left. But consider this composition, which should feel almost the same. Still moving left, but it's also moving in. Do you see now where we're going with this? This is what perspective is. Perspective is a way to add depth to composition. Perspective serves composition. That's what the big picture is. Let's go through a few examples first, before we move on, though. I want to run through some examples of composition and really drill this concept of focus and motion into our heads, okay? Here's one from film history class, going through the Oscars this year. This is a screen cap from Citizen Kane. Let's break out our grid. Don't worry about the right side, I guess. So tell me here, where is the focus? There we go. Where would you say the focus is? Give me a coordinate. I think you're on the right track here, the castle. DE or JK? DE, JK, DE, ONJ, ONJ? Ah. ONJ, KDE? The window in the castle. Very good. Now, we talked about this a lot last week in terms of value contrast, but I think the reason why the window stands out is because of value contrast. It's light and dark. But so, in a perspective sense, right? What's going on here? Well, you have the edge of the castle. That's pushing us up this way. The other edge is putting us up that way. Oh, what are they both pointing at? But look very subtly. You see this gate in the foreground? That's pushing us too. All of this is pushing us in this direction. The eyes both drawn to the figures and the castle. Yeah, there is a bit of the figures here, but if you think about it, all of the rhythms are pushing us away from the figures. Ah. Or are they? Because you could argue that the figures are at one focal point and the castle's at another, and we're actually being drawn between them. In that sense, I think that your answer is actually correct. They're just monkeys or whatever, but you can see that there is a journey here. And you'll note that there's basically no perspective, even though we have the sense that this is further away. I'm pretty sure that's because this is a matte painting and it's not a real set, but hopefully it should give you this sense that you don't need to understand perspective to create composition. Let's try another one. Where's the focus? The man. Yeah, I think it's pretty obviously the man. Notice something about where the man's position is? I-N-O? I-N-O. Oh, over here, you think? E-D-K. So we've got the man, I-N-O, E-K-D-J. Right, so here, K. I like the black statue, little thingamajiggy. Yeah, oh, this thing, right, okay. Now, you'll notice something about all of these guesses is they kind of follow a path. I wonder what's creating that. Now, these lines follow perspective, but they're just created by light. This isn't a literal street, but it should get you thinking about all the ways in which we can move the eye. Does that make sense? I think it's I-N-O because it has the most activity. Yeah, there's a lot of detail here, but I think that more than anything, we're thinking in terms of contrast, right? All of this is highly detailed, but I feel like none of this contrasts with itself. In some sense, the lion guy, he looks quite dark, but he doesn't contrast very much against this. This contrast, the light door against the dark, and of course in the film, you'd see this guy moving, all create the impression that this is the focus, my opinion. Note also how these faces, they're off to the edge, so nothing is really pointing to them, just like we were discussing before. You could argue that maybe this is more of a focus, but note how her face is looking away. Intuitively, we don't look at that. Still, I'm glad that you're all thinking about this. Primarily, though, I want you to notice that there's really not much perspective going on here, but we do have these really strong lines. Even just the line from his shadow pushes us in this direction, along this flow, right? And sometimes that's all you need. Think about flow. Let's take a look at this one. A screenshot from 5 centimeters per second. Lovely, underrated film. No one has ever seen it since Your Name came out. Who can blame them? Now, this absolutely is using perspective. But where do our eyes focus? H. Okay. The back door, G-H. DJ. DJ. Ah, interesting. A lot of highs. I'm not sure high is quite right. I think it would be an interesting argument there. So, a lot of you have caught on to the fact that the perspective lines are definitely pushing us towards this back door. But, and I know that this isn't technically the subject of today's tutorial, I want to ask a different question as well. Because you have to think of, you should ideally think of art holistically. It involves all things. And for those of you who didn't catch last week's, week before last week's shading tutorial, go give it a look-see when you get a chance. But maybe some of you can see where I'm going with this. We know that we're being pushed by the perspective lines. All of these perspective lines are pushing us towards this door. But there's one other thing to consider, is we have these lines. They are technically pushing towards the door, but they're interrupted by all these people who kind of don't really push anywhere. So where does this line push us? And once you've thought about that, consider this. Where is the highest point of contrast in this image? The protagonist, precisely. It's the protagonist that gets most of the attention because the dark of his coat contrasts with the surroundings. Compare that to this door. We're all supposed to be looking at the door, but the contrast is actually not that light. It's not that much. It's light against light. All of this means that, in the end, our eyes do go on this journey, but more likely than not, we start here, not here. Now, I think it's important to remember that why would we do this, you know? What is the point of the story? Like, why wouldn't you just move this? Why shouldn't the protagonist be here? You know? Everything should be pointing to him, right? But doesn't that tell a story too? In this shot, we feel like the world extends outside the protagonist. In this part of the movie, he's going to take like a 3-hour train to see his girlfriend. And, you know, he's a kid, and he really, you know, he loves her, and they're really separated by distance. These themes that Shinkai loves. So even though we do see the protagonist, you can't help but also look past him and see this whole world of people who don't care about him and feel as alone as he does, even when surrounded by other people. So I guess what I'm saying is that this piece too has a story to tell, even in how they try and push you past the protagonist, but also make sure that you still sort of look at him. After all, these heads here, they form a line that can go to him. And more than anything, the perspective informs a sense of depth. It makes this world feel very real. Alright, one final piece. This is from Night is Short, Walk On Girl. A strange but marvelous film. What I found interesting is that a lot of their imagery is very surreal. But where are we drawn to in this image? I hope that you guys are also not just looking at the focus, but try and find the flow. Those lines I'm drawing, think about them. Can you draw them out there? Where would you say the focus is? Or even better, if you can describe where do you think the flow lines are. Her head, okay. So IJ or so. The line in the skyline goes towards the head. What, you mean like this? Yeah, I think that's a great observation. Can we get any other observations of things which drive the flow? Would this be a good piece? Would this be a good piece since she is placed in the middle? Yes, we'll talk about that briefly. Keep that thought in mind. Any other ideas for either the focus or objects which are driving the flow? The streetlights, very good. All these streetlights form a line. Top and bottom, actually. Anyways, I think that you guys are pretty much right. We're definitely focusing on her, and you're seeing a lot of different lines that are pointing in this direction. The arm pointed towards the drink, very good, very good. I would encourage you to look even beyond this. Look at this mountain. It's very subtle, but it's moving in here. We can see the other perspective line, but her body blocks most of where we would see the rest of this, so it ends up just pointing at her. And you can even see on the water line another really strong motion in that direction. So a lot of you have pointed out, oh, this composition feels a little bit more symmetrical. Why is she in the center? My god, she's in the center! And I think we've seen kind of two disparate points about this. Is this a bad composition? Or symmetry is okay sometimes. Bring it back to the definition of composition, right? We're trying to tell a story. The few cases where I would argue that symmetry is warranted is where it tells the story, where that lack of motion is the story. I think that's where it's justified. So first of all, note that even though she's kind of in the center, she's definitely not symmetric. Her back arm is up, but her front arm is down. We're only seeing one part of her face. Her hair is stretching out in this direction. There's lots of things that aren't symmetric about the composition, even down to here. Like, this water is hugely non-symmetric to this street. But bottom line is she's in the center, and we would normally expect her to be over here. Here's the problem, though. If she is over here, and everything is moving towards her, what's over here? We want to go on a journey, right? And I think that, honestly, if she was all on this left side and all you had was this ocean, I think the composition would actually feel unbalanced. You intuitively want to go on the journey from here to here. So everyone would be looking here at nothing, and the composition would feel sort of weird. My suspicion is that someone drew this background, which I think is very good, with the idea that the focus was here. And then they did the animation, and they're like, if we have her over there, it's too crowded here, and we can't get anything, like, this is too much empty space. I've got an idea. Let's move her more to the center as a compromise, so that we don't feel like this part is too empty, but we still get some of this perspective. My feeling is basically that this is a compromise situation. In short, I wouldn't say it's a bad composition. I think you could probably refine it a bit if you wanted to. But even if you consider it to be a non-perfect composition, I want you all to understand the ways in which it's using composition to make its point, right? It still has a focus, it still has a direction to that focus, a good flow, and all that is good. And I guess it's like, I think it is a little bit boring, but if I had to justify it from a storytelling perspective, her character is also about how, like, for most of the movie, she's very much alone, but happy with that. And therefore, the fact that she is, like, here in the center shows how everything is revolving around her, literally. There's no other people, like, there's this couple down here, but how long have you been looking at this drawing and not even seen them, right? They have such low contrast. They're so unimportant to her. And that's a huge part of the message. In that sense, I think that you could argue about the composition, but you could also argue there's a storytelling point to it. And I guess that's the lesson of studying this, is I want you all to remember that the story comes first and foremost, and if you can justify why you're doing the composition the way you are, like, that's good. That's okay. I just feel like the girl in the background are two separate pieces, they don't seem to match. Yeah, I feel that. There's a few things. And part of this is the eccentricities of the movie itself. But you'll notice how this texture here doesn't have perspective on it. It kind of makes the background feel a little flat. And of course, the colors, like this pink and this yellow, stand out so much from everything here. It feels like it's a little bit mismatched. It's not balanced. But I also think that's intentional on the part of the creator and director Masaaki Yuasa. I think he wants her to stand out. I think the story is all about not fitting in. So, again, if you have a story justification, I think it works. But you can form your own opinions. And if you can start analyzing perspectives, compositions, and figure, I think that one's good, I think that one's bad, that's perfect. I don't want you to just love all the compositions I love. I want you to, draw your own opinions. Get it? Draw your own opinions. Draw your own conclusions. That's the word. Messed that up. We'll not talk about that pun anymore. Okay, so I think we should all do one example, still not, like, talking about perspective yet to try and utilize flow. And I know that a lot of you are drawing along, so I would love to see what you're doing. Flat colors are standing out to me. Yeah, I think that's intentional. I would love to allow all of you guys to start analyzing composition proactively. No matter what you conclude, as long as you can have opinions and not just think, oh, that one looks good, that one looks bad. Okay, so let's hear it from you, chat. Let's hear about some environments, particularly any environment where you might feel like difficulty in creating a composition, and let's make something together. Where should we draw? City, Sibling says. City it is, okay. Let's get more specific. What in the city? What's our focus within the city, shall we say? Looking over city from roof, traffic, restaurant, I think I'm hungry, okay. Well, I'm talking about specifically the focus. So I think restaurant works. Looking over city from roof is just a idea. Give me something that we're looking at. You see what I'm saying? Ramen noodle shop? Oh, I'm liking where this is going. Alright, well, that settles it. I guess we're doing a ramen shop. So, how can I put this? My recommendation is that you start with the shop, figure out where the focus is going to be, and then just start thinking of ways to push our attention towards that shop. Okay? This is how I want to get everyone to start thinking about composition. It's okay if you don't know perspective, it's okay if you aren't used to doing this, just, you know, break them down into big, basic shapes. That's all you need. Let's get us all some more stuff to work on. What work with? What should be the theme of this ramen shop? What sets it apart? Can it have a mascot? Can it have a particular shape? I want to make sure that we all have enough of a basis to work on. Ramen. In the city. Miso ramen with pork buns. Ramen and pork buns. Sure. Yeah, pork bun. Okay, fine. Bao mascot. Sure. Now, let's start thinking about things in the city. Things we can use to move attention, right? Give me some things in a city. Think of it like this is our subject, our focus, that is. And everything here is going to give us our direction. Street lights, food stalls. A window, okay, sure. Cars, yes. I love this. Walkways, keep going. I like how a lot of these are coming from the analyses that we did, which is great. Patrons. Patreons? Patreons! Hey, sir! Before you get your ramen, please join my Patreon! Sorry. I assume you meant patrons. Alright. So, streetlights, cars, food stalls, walkways, windows, patrons. I just want everyone to have this all in the back. You don't need to use all of it in your drawing if you don't want to, but keep this all in mind. The tall, tall pole. What do you mean, the tall, tall pole? Cables. Oh, I like that. Cables, power lines. Very great idea. Trash can. So trash can is interesting because I feel like unless you have a row of trash cans, it's going to be hard to direct flow that way, right? All of these things, you can imagine them lined up, you can imagine them large enough that they are themselves a flow, especially the cables and power lines. Really think that's a great idea. But the reason why trash cans is not as big a detail is the same reason why I would say that, like, maybe a bird wouldn't work either. You know what I mean? A fallen over trash can. Or even trash might be better. Sure. Trash. Okay. So everybody, you know, pick up whatever drawing equipment best suits you, and let's make this ramen shop, okay? Start by figuring out where the focus is. And remember that you don't need to copy me in any way. But you can if you're not quite sure what you want to do. I encourage you all to try and experiment, right? For me, I don't know, I'm just feeling like maybe this ramen shop is over here. So I'm going to put the ramen shop here. I'm going to design it here. We said that it had a big mascot. Bao Ramen. In particular, I'm going to try and make the focus this like open door here. And I'm really going to try to avoid using perspective very much to do this. Because the whole point is that it's just one part of a bigger picture, you know? You shouldn't need it. But okay, so we have our ramen shop. And you can design yours as much sunlight, maybe. If we have value, then yeah. But let me get started here. So wires. I've been doing a lot of wire studies as part of my my last background. Some of you are familiar. So I'm going to have these wires here. Like I want this to be the focus, right? So let's put some more wires up there. Let's put some wires up here. Put some wires going in other directions. This is kind of moving us too far up, so I'm not going to use the wires there. I like this direction more. We said walkways, so I'm just going to push in this direction. That doesn't quite feel right. I think I like it more this way. I guess I just feel like, to me, if everything points directly at it, it's a little bit too blunt, so I like to be a little subtle. So I'm kind of pointing this over here, pointing this over there, this over here, and kind of gently moving our eyes towards this area. Let's see, what other things did we have? We had cars, streetlights, definitely, okay. So you saw how the image from the Night is Short treated this. Bunch of lights basically forming a line like this. We can do that in a few different ways. But always think in terms of that rhythm, right? I want to move our eyes along this rhythm. I can erase the lines afterwards. Let's see, other food stalls, I remember that. I like that idea too. I actually think these lights are a little bit too short, so I'm gonna change their size. Oh no, now they aren't pointing in the right direction. I will alter them so that they are pointing in the right direction. What is the right direction? We still want to point this way. So let's align them to there. Okay. We had cars. I'm just gonna put a truck back here because I can. It's weird. So this car, you see how this and this are both pointing in that direction? I think that makes sense. How are you all doing? I'm gonna put some other buildings here in the background, just to further point us in this direction. We had a stall. I'm going to point again this way, this way, this way. Well, everything pointing here. Just think in terms of those big flow lines, right? Put in some people here. Maybe it can be like stir-frying something. More Patreons. Oh, yes. Patreons. I forget what the old Patreon logo used to look like. And of course we have patrons too. I'm assuming this ramen shop is really popular, so it's going to have a line, right? It's have a big line of people. And in order to direct us in this way, I'm just going to kind of make... If I make all these people back here like a little bit larger, then that's going to create a flow like this. Make sense? This guy can be like going inside. He's been waiting there for like 3 hours and he's super excited. Inside is like a chef. I'll put in a few more. Just like give this sense that this line is kind of going on forever, right? Walkways, windows, trash, power lines, cables. Okay. Alright, so you want trash. You want trash. Well, okay. I'll have this trash can here. But the more important thing, I think, is that I want the trash to kind of be moving out in this direction. And let's see, windows. I mean, there's windows up here. I feel really bad now. It made Meg feel bad. I don't like being teased, but I don't live by the words that I said out, so I'll do better in the future. Let me see. Windows. What if we put some of these windows like this? I don't really know what they are, but I think that looks pretty cool, actually. I like that. Maybe we can do that here, too. There's lots of windows. I guess that means this building is much higher than I thought it was going to be. So you see how vague I can be about this? Like, literally, I'm just putting in all these lines kind of pointing in this direction, and it's creating this nice flow. Like, that's it. That's the gist of my composition right here. Okay, so how's everyone else doing on their drawing? We spent about a half hour on that. Probably less, actually, now that I think. Okay, putting in a literal arrow, probably a bit of a drastic step. And guess what? Let's continue off of last week's lesson. I'm going to use a bit of value control to even further emphasize these points while I wait for you guys to finish up with yours. So those of you who did the value tutorial, can you figure out how I'm going to approach this? Where do I want the contrast to be? All this stuff goes hand in hand. Change a lot of positions of the store. Good, that's great. I'm really excited to see how you did the store. I think I'm gonna have it be night up here, so I'll make this like quite dark. I'm gonna make this stuff even darker because it's far away. Like, it can really just be as simple as I want this part to be the focus, so it's not that I'm gonna make it light, I'm gonna make everything else contrast with it more. In fact, maybe I'll put this trash can to be quite dark. There, now you can't help but look over there. There we go. Okay. But you see where we're going with this, right? This is our focus. The line of people, the power lines, these windows, these street lights, the boutiques, everything is pointing us in this direction. That's what works as a composition. So, does anybody have an example of your own? Doesn't need to be like finished or anything like that, but I would love to go over and show everyone else what you've been doing. Great. Okay, so let's take a look at what Loli did for hers. Ramen. Okay, a lot of good stuff here. I love how these I love how the lanterns point us in this direction. I love the design, very small, but they read very well. The street also, all of this stuff works well. And of course you had your poles and all that. But let's talk a little bit about the lines here that you're using for the flow, right? Now, here's an interesting point, though, about this drawing, Loli. So it looks like you've placed at the top right here, yeah? But a lot of these lines are moving inwards, like this way, right? Kind of, we want everything to move towards here. Here, you know, that makes sense, that's good. But these lines are kind of moving us up past there. It might feel better if they're moving us more inwards. It seems like a subtle thing, but it could make a world of difference. These mountains are really great, love that. But the power lines, you see how these kind of aren't really moving us anywhere? In that sense, I feel like they could perhaps be altered a little bit. For example, if you put one of the power lines back here, then you have them kind of moving in this direction. Or, same idea, in the other direction, like that. Now, you wouldn't just necessarily put them on both sides, because again, symmetry, less interesting. Let me see. This house here, these two lines, they're not really pointing us in the right direction. This line isn't pointing us quite in the right direction. Like, it sounds weird. This is good. This house works. This house kind of works. Let's see. This one, so it's a little bit okay. This car. But you see what I'm getting at here, right? Like, you can look at almost every line you're making. These stairs, these are stairs? I really love that, actually. I think this works really well. Every line you draw, every single one, we can try and move towards the shop. And again, I really love this cat. It's what's the guy's name? It's Karamelu's cat. No copyright infringement intended. But so I've got this ramen shop, and I'm gonna start with the steps. I really like that. I'm going to use the lanterns. I really like those. I'm gonna keep them going, in fact. There's no reason to stop them. I'm gonna have them on the other side too. But I want, you know, every line, I want us to move in that direction. So I'm actually going to move them like this, so that we're putting in that way. Does that make sense? I think I might even alter the steps a little bit too, to help with that. Houses, you got it. Let's make the houses, again, let's follow this line, right? And you want a house over here, you know, fine. Let's have the ending push us in that direction a little bit. I want all of these to push in this direction. You get me? Everything needs to push us in towards the ramen shop. Mountains are fine, they can stay that way. Maybe I'll put in a few more in the background even. But everything's gonna push us towards there, and then the power lines. Yeah, let's have them be above. You know, why not? Don't want them to be symmetrical. Maybe I'll have like a bunch of different, maybe there's like lanterns hanging, I don't know. But you see where we're getting that? We see what we were getting at, Loli? The difference between this drawing and this drawing is just that every line, I want to point us towards the focus. And I think that that's a good way to internalize it. Anybody else have a drawing to share? Would love to see them. And again, Loli, the cat, very cozy. I really like that you were putting it all in action and doing your best and sharing it with us. Thank you so much. Right. I don't view this as being finished at all. We're just here trying to put into practice what we've been talking about. Gonna fix the drawing a little, finish it. You really like it? Oh, that's really great, Loli. I'm so happy. I used to don't like drawing city all the time, but changed my mind. Yeah, like, I know that for a lot of you guys and gals here, like, drawing... Ooh, I like this, Shinxy. Drawing landscape and perspective and all that is, you know, intimidating and everything. But I'm glad that you're taking that step. I really do want to try and do my best to help you guys to feel confident in this part of the art. So this is Shinxy's drawing, and I think there's some really great stuff going on here. I love the crosswalk. I think that does a fantastic job of moving us in that direction. Right? These, I'm not sure if they're power lines, perhaps, but whatever they are, they do great as well. And here's an interesting thing. These windows, I think, are actually fine. Even though the windows don't push us towards the ramen shop, they feel naturalistic. They don't really push us away from it, and they add some nice detail. The little, like, lanterns. Yeah. And even this traffic light, there's this very subtle motion here at the top and bottom that's pushing us in. And I like that very much. Obviously, it's not finished, but I think the one thing that stands out to me right now is the car more than anything. The car isn't really doing anything for the perspective, and it could be. That's the thing, is it could be. If we see just the front of the car, just a little bit of the front, now suddenly we have some direction. Some cars have little grills, right? The windshield, right? This line can point that way, the top line can point this way, and then suddenly the car is helping. The one other thing, of course, and I know that it's not finished, so presumably you're going to add something in, but obviously this all looks very empty. And the thing is, when you contrast detail with emptiness, now this is the point of contrast, because this is stuff and this is not stuff. So you want to put something in there. Honestly, I think it could be as simple as, like, more cars, right? Use our same trick as before. If this is like, I don't know, a huge truck, right? Maybe some people. A crowd would also be fine, since it's a crosswalk. Maybe some people are, like, walking across. This would make the car be very tall, but, you know, whatever. Just things to make sure that this side is also working to push us towards the ramen restaurant. Maybe you could even put a divider in the middle of the street. Maybe like a, I don't know, a sign or something. You know, it doesn't have to be profound. And then on this side, like, we could have some more buildings. Again, with the windows, maybe they push us down in this direction. Just lines, you know? Ideas. But so those are a few examples. And now the part you've all been waiting for. Perspective. Everybody talks about perspective. Everybody talks about how terrible it is and how all the problems they have with perspective. But you gotta remember one thing that I think most people don't remember. Perspective creates depth to serve composition. If you just think of perspective without thinking of composition, like, you don't understand how to use it. You don't know why it exists. In the context of art, perspective exists to serve composition. And that's why I feel like we needed to talk about perspective first. Okay? So, I pose this question again to all of you. How much do you feel you're familiar with perspective? Trying to do more perspective, but sometimes you feel you don't get it. Kindergarten level with it. Usually go with my guts because I never take art classes. Gotcha. Okay, so I'm going to start somewhere you might not expect when it comes to perspective, okay? Let's think about this box, okay? We want this box to have depth. We want it to feel like it exists in a three-dimensional space and it's moving outwards from us, right? Now, you say kindergarten level, and think what you will, but this is literally the mindset that I took into kindergarten. So I know you can do this. The easiest way to make this box have depth is to draw another box at the other side, and then connect them with these lines. Does that make sense? This should be the most intuitive way to draw in 3D. You have a front side, whatever it is. You have a back side that looks the exact same. And then you connect them. Now you have a 3D object, right? It's basics. It's basics. You understand that. Definitely heard it, never too much about serving composition or why it matters so much. I'm really excited for this next part. Great. Spoilers. Here is the question at hand. When you have this box, you just have the box. Which direction do these lines go? Where is this back face? Is it the same size? These are the questions that we go to perspective to find the answers for. Where do the lines go? What if this box is on its side? Where do those lines go? The answers lie in perspective, and I'm actually not going to go first to what you might have heard. I want you to consider the answers of isometric perspective. You may be familiar with isometric perspective. You may have seen it in certain tactics video games, for example. I'll just bring one up briefly. Consider this screenshot from the upcoming game Triangle Strategy. I don't even need to say anything. I want you all to intuitively look at how this space exists and remember that when you see these kinds of shapes, this is an isometric perspective. When we say isometric, what we mean really is that the answer to that box question is always vertical, left on this diagonal, or right on this diagonal. Everything in this scene follows this rule. Consider the balcony, right? Here's a post, it's straight up. Here's a post, it's straight up. How do we connect them? Side to side. Here's another one. Same approach. We'll put this post up here. Okay, well these two need to connect because we just know that they all connect. But how do these two connect? Because they're right next to each other, side to side, just like that. We just keep that pattern going. Like this, like this. Once we're on the ground, we make squares. Always on the same direction, always on the same direction. This does create a sense of space. This is, in fact, the first way that artists chose to represent depth. The Chinese used this in their paintings thousands of years ago. It's intuitive. And I want you guys to, understand that perspective isn't some monolithic concept that we can't touch if we haven't studied backgrounds all our lives. It's really at this level, simple. Draw a box. Okay, here's the top of the box. How high is it? It's this high. Okay, let's draw the left side. Drawing left, always draw like this. Oh, that's the end of the box? Vertical line. Okay, now we draw the right. All the right lines, they're going to draw like this. Okay, great. We've done the other sides. Oh, the top. What do we do for the top? Well, this left line's going to go like that, and the right line's going to go like that. Boom. Now we have some kind of perspective. It has a sense of depth. It's a box. Now, the advantage to this method is that it's very easy to understand. Want to draw a room? Okay, let's draw a room. Make this much bigger box. I think that the floor is going to be tiled, so we're going to do a bunch of lines like that, and a bunch of lines like this. You see how this creates a space for us? Oh, we need a wall. Straight up. How high? That high. Okay, we'll draw another one here, and we'll connect them with this line. See what we're getting at? We create a space very simply this way. Let's let this be a balcony. Let's have it be round. Okay, we'll have it be round. We can still follow these lines out, though, if we want. All of these verticals are straight up. Now, you might say, well, how does this round thing work? It's not that you have to have every line follow these. It's that if they exist in squares relative to each other, if we have like a literal box, or let's just say a table, right? If we have a table, we know that these two ends of the table should be the same, so they connect this way. So to show perspective, should we always be thinking three-dimensionally? I don't know if it's a stupid question, but can you show perspective in a 2D space? Elaborate on your question. What do you mean by show perspective in a 2D space? So we can have this table, and it's going to have verticals and things like that. But what if we want a round table? That's okay. We just draw a circle, and then we draw its, its leg. The key thing to understand is that in isometric perspective, everything is going to follow these squares. I mean, I think it's like drawing both in 3D and 2D. Well, I guess what I'm going to eventually tell you is that you want to draw with a mind towards composition and allow the 3D aspect to augment that. Because if you're thinking carefully, there is a strong, very strong disadvantage to isometric perspective. What are we looking at? Where's the focus? If I'm understanding Wen's question correctly, I think the answer is actually no. I think it's more important not to try and understand the 3D space, but actually to think about your flow and your directionality. And in that sense, I guess you can think of it in a 2D sense. It's hard to tell. That's correct. There is no flow, mostly, because all of these lines do not converge. They can't converge. That's the whole point of isometric perspective. So you don't actually have a focus. In these situations, artists would create focus by the placement of objects. You know, you place a bunch of people here and suddenly you're looking at them because they aren't anywhere else. But the thing is, whenever you're doing drawings like in isometric, almost inevitably, you're going to be looking over a wide area and not having very much focus. Consider this image. Here's a woodblock print. Look at how they're using isometric perspective, right? Oh, the bridge goes to the right, okay? We draw them like this. Bridge goes to the left, okay? We draw the bridge like this. That applies to the poles. And it does feel like there is a depth here. Where's the focus, though? I mean, especially when it comes to the bridge, it just kind of, it wanders. It wanders. All we can do is follow the path of the bridge. But it doesn't really point us at anything. It kind of points us at the tree, but only because of this landmass here, which isn't following perspective. And maybe this mountain, which again, not in perspective. Isometric perspective is limited because it doesn't converge. Does this make sense to everybody? I think isometric is good to feel out what it's like to create a 3D space and to understand that all perspective is just trying to answer the question of what do you do to this box to make it 3D. I want to break down the illusion that it's this thing that you can't do, okay? So what do artists do to solve this problem? Well, the Renaissance artists came to an answer. The one-point perspective. This is the kind that if you ever took an art class in school, you probably had a test on this, and you probably hated it. Now, I'm going to assume that some people in our class today do not know what one-point perspective is. It's pretty simple, but I want to emphasize that a whole lot of people, I think, get a little too obsessed with what I'm about to tell you. 3 steps. You're going to have a horizon line, okay? A horizon line, and you're going to pick a point on this horizon line. Most demonstrations will put it somewhere in the center. Maybe you can see where I'm going with this. Now, remember our question, right? We have our box. What do we do with those sidelines? Well, in one-point perspective, everything goes towards this point. And you cut it off when you see how thick the object is. No matter what the object is, no matter where it is, if you see this edge, it's going to go towards that point. That means that if an object is above the horizon line, the line's going to go down. If it's below the horizon line, it's going to go up. Does that make sense? And you'll immediately notice there's an advantage to this, right? Now, all of these flow lines are pointing us towards the vanishing point. This is called the vanishing point on the horizon. So now we're getting better, right? We've got some kind of a focus. But can you guys see what the problem might be here? Is where have we put our focus? Put it right in the center. It's boring. It's so boring. And people who learn this in school, I think, especially people who aren't, like, interested in perspective, especially people who are just forced to draw blocks over and over and over, they just conclude that it's boring because they're not using the rules of composition. Remember our example from 5 centimeters per second? We all agree that this is using perspective, and we can break it down to a one-point perspective system. This is converging here, this is converging here, this is converging here. Look how exact it is. All of these lines go in to exactly this point. That means that the horizon is here. But what have we learned? Why isn't it here? Because it's not interesting. This is the left third. To use one-point perspective effectively, you need to remember the rules of composition. And here's another thing. How many boxes are in this scene? Basically none. You have this thing. That's kind of a round triangle. You have this thing, which has been divided into these grates. All of these are actually individual objects that sort of form a perspective. But he really mixes up the shape language so it doesn't become boring. Because that, I think, is the number one risk with one-point perspective, is it can seem really boring, stale. All it means is that you need to remember the composition rules. You can't just use perspective in isolation. It has to serve the composition. It has to serve the focus. But now you have some answers to how to create depth, right? You have a character. And she's looking at, I don't know, let's make it a gate, because why not? So now we want to move the focus this way, right? So what determines what these lines are? The perspective. So I want to have this flow because I want to move towards the towards this door. Well, look at that. I just created a vanishing point. That means that everything else in this composition can follow that too. Boop, 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 boop. So you see how the two kind of intermesh? The needs of composition can flow naturally into one-point perspective. We can actually retroactively look at what everyone was doing with their examples, and probably, I bet, we'll be able to apply perspective to it. Let's look at Neko Ramen again, right? Well, we have these lines here, and they're sort of converging, somewhere up there. Ah, but isn't that interesting? If they're converging up here, then that's where the horizon line is. But we can see the skyline is down here. So that implies that the sky should probably have been a little bit higher. We're looking down on everything. But you'll notice another thing too, right? By this logic, what about these guys? You know, they're not moving towards the perspective line. Are they wrong? No, they're not wrong. They're just not turning in the same way. Because if you look around you, not everything is arranged to be exactly facing you or exactly not facing you. This is another limitation of one-point perspective. It doesn't really explain what to do when you have a bunch of different objects facing different directions. If we have a top-down view, right? Let's say we have a house, and one of it is looking like that, so that's easy. It goes like that, goes straight towards the horizon. Great. What do we do for a house that's like this? Like at a slant? It's a little bit hard to say. And I think a huge problem to me is that people will take the easiest answer. So you don't really know what to do with this one. It's like, oh, well, where does it go? It's not moving towards the vanishing point. I just won't have it. And that gives you really boring compositions too. That's why I encourage you to think of it compositionally first, right? Where do I want things to go? Okay, now I know I want to go there. Let me backtrack and figure out what the perspective should be. Does that make sense? This is what I call generalist perspective. Observe here. There's basically no perspective at all, right? Like, there's no pathways. Where's the vanishing point? I mean, it must be somewhere here, because this is probably where the horizon is, but I don't know. Could be there, it could be here. There's no perspective really working. However, we are taking advantage of some principles of perspective. Allow me to explain. We know that when you have a perspective line and things get closer to it, they also must get smaller. Do you understand why? If this is the front of the box, and we follow it all the way back, as long as we're on these lines, the box is like the same height, it's just getting further into the distance. So that means that if the box is this close, it's going to be this big. But when the box is this close, it's going to be this big. They're going to appear to get smaller as they get further away. Now we have a general rule. Objects get smaller with distance. So look here. This mountain is big, this mountain's a little bit smaller. And if you think about it, this foreground, it makes it look like this mountain is probably much bigger than these. In a generalist way, I'm making mountains that get smaller, but I'm not worrying about the specifics. It's much more useful, in my opinion, to keep the trends in mind. We know that this is true because of one-point perspective, but that doesn't mean we have to use one-point perspective when we're, like, drawing. Is this making sense? I hope this is making it feel a little easier for you. Other things that we know from perspective? Well, we've been talking about this, right? We know that whenever things move in a certain direction, they're going to converge there. All of these lines are going to, let's see. All of these lines are going to move us, our eyes, towards wherever these lines are going, our eyes are going to follow, right? That means converging lines imply perspective. Convergence implies perspective. If I make a bunch of trees, right? Let's make some trees. Doesn't matter the specifics, but I know that I want these trees to focus us to here, right? Well, I know they get smaller, and I also know that if they all kind of move us in one direction, it's going to imply a kind of perspective. Make it smaller, make it smaller. And you can almost see a perspective going on here. But I haven't drawn any perspective lines, it's ambiguous where the horizon is, you know, whatever, doesn't matter. We're using these generalist principles to convey our story. The fact that both of these trees go to about the same place, even though they're trees, you know, like some could be higher, some could be smaller, it still feels like we're using perspective. That's the gist of it. So, first question is, who's still confused about what one-point perspective is and how to use it? I'm good. Now memory refresh. Not me. Okay, great. That's good, because now it's time to move on to the real workhorse in perspective, at least to me. 2-point perspective. Perhaps if you are already unfamiliar, you can try and figure out what 2-point perspective is just from looking at this image. We've already had one vanishing point, and now we have two. One over here and one over there. Why does this work? One thing that you'll notice, and I told you this before, right, is whenever you're drawing 1-point perspective, well, we know what it says for the stuff on this side, but do you ever notice how all of these lines are straight? One point tells us nothing about these other lines. Remember how we started this discussion. We have this box, and we're trying to figure out how do we move the other lines of the box to create depth. 1-point perspective says, well, find a vanishing point and move anything that you can towards there, but keep these straight. Isometric says, if it's on the left side, move it in these directions. If it's on the right side, move it in these directions. Always. 2-point perspective says, okay, Figure out your height. Okay? Now, if it's on the left side, it's going to converge here, at whatever this point is. And if it's on the right side, it's going to converge somewhere else. Like there. Now, this might not really seem profound yet, but I think I use two-point perspective more often than I use any other perspective system. Consider a normal room, right? Consider the room you're in right now. You have maybe a back wall, I know I do. And it looks like this. In my room, there's a window on this left side, and you can already see what kind of perspective system are we setting up here, everybody. Got a refrigerator, got like a kitchen counter, a little microwave. 1 point, yes. And you can tell it's 1 point because all of these horizontal lines are just straight horizontal lines. But now look at your actual room. Like, look around. Like, I'm just gonna look in this corner, right? Corner of the same room. I don't see any flat lines. I see one wall, and the top is converging somewhere over here. The bottom's converging somewhere over there. Look over to the window. The window is converging somewhere over here. There's a balcony outside. It's going to keep following these convergence lines. As long as we're on the left. On the right, it's the opposite. In fact, there's a bit of a wall outside. Kind of a balcony ceiling, right? There's a bit of a window thing here. It's going to separate. But you see where I'm going with this? We're still just answering the question of where do these lines go? But now we have this answer that's very, very versatile as far as everything on this direction is going to converge over here. Everything in this direction is going to converge over there. Okay? Brain is exploded. I see. I see. Yes, it's a bit of a big step. So let's break it down at its simplest level, shall we? Let's go back to our box. All right. Before we even do the box, let's start with a horizon line. Okay? Draw along if you're finding this hard to understand. We're going to pick 2 points. One on the left and one on the right. Now, let's start with a vertical line. This represents the height of any object. As long as we're on the left side, we're going to converge to this. If we're on the right side, we're going to converge to that. This works for any vertical line, so I encourage you to draw a bunch. Let's make one that's really high. Like a skyscraper, you know? Use this vertical as the dividing line to tell you what goes where. Let's put a box on top of this. Start with one vertical. Oh, we can see underneath this. Well, this is going in this direction, so it must converge over there. Let's go completely beneath. That goes over there, it goes over there, this goes over here, this goes over here. Oh, we can see the top of it. Well, this goes over here, this goes over here. The more you do it, the more natural it's going to feel. But just start with the vertical, and then find out where it's going to converge. Now, some of you may be wondering, what do you do if it's over on the other side? Well, in principle, you would still be doing the same thing. It would just start looking kind of different. This is going to be useful if you're going to draw a staircase. Yeah, very much so. You're noticing how perspective has so many different applications, I think. And remember, we're using blocks because they're simple. But in general, you're going to find these apply to different objects. Nonetheless, something to remember, and that I perhaps should have drawn more attention to, is that whenever you're making an environment, you can break down all kinds of shapes into these blocks, okay? If it's confusing you. Let's take a dining hall, right? Dining hall, okay? I'm going to imagine that we have a horizon line here. Here's one point, here's another point. These all converge in this way. This converges over there. Long hallway, you know? Hell, let's make it a little longer, because we can. Why not? So now we have a big dining table. Oh, no, dining table. It's got fancy legs. Like, oh, what are we going to do? Well, just start with, one line converges there. One line converges there. Boom. It's a table of some kind. It has, legs. We'll replace these later. We'll make them fancier. Oh, the table needs chairs. Okay, let's, make a vertical here, behind. The back edge is going to go like this, and it's going to go like this. The seat is going to go in the other direction. Now we got a chair. And you just keep doing this for, like, every object that you're not sure about. And what if... Oh, well, there's a chandelier. What do we do? It's a round... What are we going to do? It's a round object. Well, think of it this way. If the chandelier, you know, whatever it is... Let's break it down into just being like a cylinder, like that. That's our chandelier, right? So now all we want to know is, are we looking down on it? Are we looking up on it? Well, if it's above this horizon line, then we must be looking up at it. And if it's below, then we're looking down. If the chandelier is here, say, it's going to be like, here's our verticals for the chandelier. Well, we're looking up because it's above the horizon line. We could even, if you really, really wanted to, you could think of it as the space inside of a block like this. You just draw a circle. And boom. Now we know where the chandelier is. And we can keep breaking it down. You know, you can go from a very simple idea of a space to a very complicated one, step by step, as long as you're comfortable. Now, there's one interesting subtle point that most people may not understand. Look at these two images of a table. In this image, we have one vanishing point here and one vanishing point here. We can see them very clearly. This table, then, is very angular, and so is the room. Compare that to this table. We've actually placed the vanishing points outside of the composition. What happens? How would you describe this table as opposed to this table? What if the points are not in the center but on the top or the bottom? Well, in a two-point perspective system, that can't happen because the horizon is defined as a horizontal line. But we'll come back to that later. You are getting at an interesting idea. The TLDR is, that's a 3 or 4 point perspective system. But we'll return to that later. Right now, you see how these 2 points are quite close to each other? And these two are quite far? And what happens to this table? Which one do you like better? This table for this table? A or B? The first one looks like we're looking up at the table, the second one looks like we're level with the table. Right, it might look like that, but the horizon line is at the exact same place relative to the table. B, you like B. See, what I would say is that B, we haven't changed the horizon line. We have not changed how tall this is. We've only changed how distorted it is. In our natural lives, moving these points farther away from each other produces a more natural look. The look in A is more extreme, and sometimes it can be useful, it can look more interesting that way. But when you want to create a very naturalistic scene, one way is to put these points very far across from each other. And again, remember that you do not have to have these points inside the frame. Just keep that in mind, because I think that if you have them like next to each other like this, you're going to get a lot of scenes that feel kind of weird. And it's okay to do that on purpose, but as a general rule, to just make a scene that looks real, you want them far away. Okay? Now, let's take a moment to go through some examples. You know, step back, try and put what we've learned into practice by criticizing other people. This is a shot from the second Ghost in the Shell film. What kind of perspective system are we seeing here? Can you figure out, for example, where the horizon line is? And if you can't, why not? It is isometric. Notice how these lines don't actually converge. And I think as a result, you'll find that the composition itself doesn't have a very strong direction. Most of the directionality relies on the fact that this thing is different from everything else around it and is a different color. Perspective-wise, it's letting our eyes slowly move throughout the scene, and it also feels kind of timeless, which is the point of the film. Let's try another one. This is a shot from Whisper of the Heart. What perspective system is going on here? There's only a few options. Correct, it's a one-point perspective system. We can see that these lines are converging. Where are they converging? You see how the composition is informing the perspective? Like, it's really clear what they want us to focus on. Here's a more interesting question. Where's the horizon line about? How high is the horizon line? We'll make this easier, shall we? Use the numbers. J, Q, P, J. J, Q, P, J. So like here, you're saying, is the horizon line? G through L. Here. J, K, P, Q. So using these numbers, sorry. So I've drawn some numbers here. So you're saying 5, 6, 7 maybe? So here's the thing. The horizon line has this lovely quality of it shows us when we can see something above or below, right? Above the horizon line, you're going to be looking down on something. You can no longer see the top side of it. Below the horizon line, you're going to look up on something. You can't see the bottom anymore. In order to figure out where this line is, there are two ways. Either you can look at what we're seeing the top and where we're seeing the bottom, or you can follow the converging lines. I'm going to try this other way. So, this is definitely the top, right? This is the top, so the horizon line is higher than this. How about the stair? Well, this is definitely the top, so the horizon line is still higher than that. What about this? I don't know, that's pretty iffy. This, I guess we can see the top. So it's got to be somewhere around here. Ah! But what about this? You see how this edge, we can't really see what's above it? And this feels like it's a surface that's slanting downward. So it's not exactly a fair comparison. It's not just one block. See how this line curves down? This is the thing, when you're drawing non-standard objects, it's not always an easy comparison. But you see what I'm getting at here? Because we can't see the top here, the horizon line is at this point. It's relatively low. You could say it's the lower third. It's something more like 7. Let's try it through the other method. Okay, we're going to follow this down. We're going to follow this down, follow this down, this down. We can see all these lines converge. I'm doing a bad job of this. But you can see how we're getting around here for the most part. Yeah, see, this doesn't actually follow quite right. There we go. You can see that down here, it's going up that way. Make sense? This also tells us that the camera, too. The camera is low in the frame. Keep that in the back of your head. Let's do a quick run back through our earlier examples, in fact. So, what number on the right side is the perspective line at? Can you figure it out? 5-ish, 6-ish? I'd say 6. I think that you are all correct. I'm feeling something like a 6-ish off of this. You can see, for example, that we see the bottom up here, but we see the top down here. So it needs to be between these two, right? Well, we're still seeing the bottom here. Let's see. Is there any other giveaways? I guess we see this is the top. So we can narrow it down to here, which is, look at that, 5 and 6. And if we follow the converging lines, we can probably get a more exact answer. Something like there. Oh, look, it's exactly between 5 and 6. Let's do one more one-point example. Our favorite, not favorite, compositional example. Where is the horizon line here? Use the numbers. 5.5. 5.5, meaning this right here? Or 6.5. There you go. Because we can see that we can't really rely on our previous method of looking at the top and bottom because of the stylization here. But we can still trace all of these lines down to somewhere around here. It's not this, even though it looks like it could be a perspective line. So that's where we have it. Let's do a few more difficult examples. Classic, Beauty and the Beast. What kind of perspective system are we seeing in this case? Isometric. Lyra, were you thinking isometric? That one. So a lot of people are saying isometric, and I understand why. Because you're seeing, oh, it's moving. These are all moving this way. You can see these lines here, these lines here, these lines here, And so on the other side, of course, these lines here, these lines here, these lines here. Wait a second. This doesn't feel quite isometric, does it? You can't see it, but I think these lines are converging. One interesting thing about isometric is, what's the difference between an isometric perspective like this and a two-point perspective? They're pretty similar, aren't they? Especially when these converging lines converge very far away, they're almost exactly the same. And they're delivering very similar answers to where do these lines go. We were talking about this earlier, Moriose. When you have a vertical line, what do you do with these two lines? Isometric says, well, you just move them in this direction, always. 2-point says you converge them. But in some cases, they give the same answer. For example, if you move this up, or if you converge them more closely, you'll get a slightly different answer. But I guess what I want you guys to think about is that this system is kind of understanding this one through a very simplified way. The difference between this and an isometric perspective is that all of these lines are not parallel. They are converging. They are not at the same angle. It's just that they converge very far away, because remember what we said about 2-point perspectives. When you put these points very far apart, you get a very naturalistic feeling. And here too, we have a very naturalistic feel. It seems like a big space. But it is, I think, a 2-point perspective. Still, it's understandable that it's a little hard to tell. The difference is very subtle. Hopefully that should also give you the confidence to say, if you can do isometric, 2-point is actually not that different. You see what I'm saying, right? Like, if it were isometric, all of these lines would be exactly the same. Especially here. They would not converge. These lines do converge, they just do so far off screen. Here's another question. Where's the horizon line now? Use the numbers. Sorry. It's off screen like 3 to 4. Well, here's the question is, can you see the bottom of an object that's above 3 and 4? It's almost a trick question. I think that if anything, you could perhaps argue that it's at 1. But for every time you look at this roof and you see that you're seeing the top of a roof, you're looking down at it. We're looking down at this. We're looking down at this. Maybe the top of the roof is up here, but it's kind of hard to tell. To me, then, it says that the horizon line, the place where underneath it you're always looking down on something, and above it you're always looking up at it, has to be like up here somewhere. Maybe here. I want you to try and understand what the horizon line implies, right? Think about it this way, right? I was just talking about how these lines converge somewhere. Where do they converge? Somewhere up there. So wherever the convergence point is, it's probably above where all these houses are. It's not to say that there is no horizon line anywhere, but you don't always see it when you're looking down at something. Does that make sense to everybody? I think so. Okay, let's do one more example, okay? Everybody's favorite, the Spiderverse. It's my favorite. Should be yours. What kind of perspective system are we seeing here? Ah, 1 point. Any other... are we all agreed on 1 point here? Isometric. Why do you think it's isometric? I want to hear justifications from everybody. Tentatively 1 point because it's all focused on the center. Okay. When? Why do you feel it's isometric? I don't think the lines converge. Okay. Let's follow a few of them. This line goes that way. I definitely see what he's getting at. These lines go this way. These lines go this way. These lines go this way. Definitely feels like they converge somewhere. If they aren't parallel lines, then this isn't isometric. The giveaway, I think, is this building here. You see how these angles change slightly? So it can't be isometric because the angles are changing so much. Okay. But why do we think it's 1 point? The reason that I'd heard was that they're all focused on the center. Okay. Well, remember what we said about 1 point. But what we were saying about 1 point is that its defining characteristic and its greatest weakness is that all of these lines are exactly horizontal. 1 point gives us no information about what to do with these lines. So, let's test that out. Are all of the non-converging lines horizontal? Do those lines converge? Well, this line goes up here, this line goes up here, this line goes down there. These lines we can't see. These are definitely at angles. Here, here, here. It's very subtle, but I'm pretty sure this is actually a 2 point perspective, because these lines are definitely not horizontal. You can actually see this here, a little more evidence of that. And what were we saying before, right? The further off they converge, the more natural it feels. But this is technically not a 1 point perspective. As long as these lines are not horizontal, you're in a 2 point perspective system. Definitely looking more dynamic looking at the 1 point I see now. Yeah, that's Spiderverse for you. Every time you look back at it, it gets better, right? And, I mean, let's just dial it back to what we were saying before about composition, right? What's the focus here? What is our focus here, would you say? K? Okay. Also miles, but less so. Right. But what have we been saying since the beginning? Composition needs two things. IL, but mostly K, right? Or JL, right? Composition needs a focus and a direction. You'll notice, of course, everyone noticed that all of this was moving us subtly towards the building here. But along that ride, so to speak, we have Miles, who is also looking in this direction. Now there's this nice use of contrast. You see how dark he is against the city, how we get this nice rim light that helps him pop against this background. And there is this interesting point of what is pointing us at Miles? Is there anything pointing us at Miles? Well, can you see why it's important that this is a 2 point perspective now? Also, this, of course, this points us up. Like, see how this stops this is definitely thrusting at Miles. But of course, the use of different color here, the use of the bridge, there's a whole story in this composition. Even how these buildings, see this, that's a rhythm. Like that. The story of this composition is Miles is going to here. Get it? And composition is all about flow, and perspective exists to complement composition. Okay? Now, there's one last thing that I think we should talk about before we get into anything advanced, which is, we talked about generalist one-point perspective. The sense that you can start using trends, like the idea that things get small, that convergence implies perspective, and that things get smaller as they get more distant, to create compositions that feel like they're in perspective without using those grids, right? We can do the same thing for two-point perspective as well. We've seen a great example of it in the Spiderverse. Horizontals, excuse me. Horizontals slant. You have a straight line, get rid of it. Shouldn't be there. Even if only slightly. Anything in your scene that's like around should slant a little bit. Even if all of them slant the same way, right? Oh, on the other side, I guess it should slant it in a slightly different way. Now, you might say to me, hey, is that isometric? I'm not sure they converge. I don't know, maybe it is. The two are very similar. And if you want it to not be isometric, you can adjust this a little bit. But when you're just trying to find quick and easy ways that don't actually use perspective to make it feel like a real space, remember that horizontals slant. That's kind of the whole trick, in my opinion, to two-point perspective. Horizontals slant, that's all you gotta know. For the last hour, I want to talk about advanced perspective and compositional techniques. If you thought that 1 and 2 point perspective was difficult, leave. Nah. This stuff might go a little over your head, but I hope that you'll consider it. We're going to start by talking about shape language. I think this part is probably the most easy to understand. You guys have noticed all of the flows that we've been talking about, right? Shape language plays into this. You guys have perhaps heard of shape language, right? It's the idea that, say, if you have a line that's vertical, this kind of gets you in the mindset of a person who is rigid, you know, by the rules, yeah? Versus someone who is, you know, horizontal, kind of feels more like lazy a little bit. And you may have heard, therefore, that someone on a slant is going to feel a little bit more dynamic. So, all of this applies to composition. Because remember, composition is about the manipulation of flow to tell a story. So the flow lines we create are themselves a method to tell stories. Say you have a huge cityscape, right? I don't even need perspective here. Just by using our value lessons from last week, I can put some of this in the foreground if I want. So you'll notice that this is not really in perspective. But what kind of mood are we getting from this, right? Even just the flows, right? Everything is looking... If this person is the focus, everything is looking down on them. And this person is admittedly looking up. Like, all of these verticals create kind of an oppressive feeling. Are you starting to see what I'm getting at? Getting from here to here, like, these two are connected, and that's dynamic. That's interesting. It's probably the most interesting part of the composition is he's looking up to where he wants to be. But everything else is trying to stop him from making that journey. Like, that's part of the shape language. So be conscientious when you create your flow itself. How easy is it for the focus to get to where they're trying to go to, right? Consider the opposite. Landscape. Not just any landscape, but a really smooth landscape. What perspective is going on here? Not much. This path is getting smaller as it goes into the distance. I'm not really worried about it. This guy is, I don't know, he's moving his, like, oxen thing. Big round oxen thing. Maybe he's got a cart. And this oxen is, you know, he's kind of lazing his way through. Even in the clouds, I can make these distant clouds a little smaller. Gives us a sense of the perspective. What's the flow here? I mean, you know, we've got this portion here. It's kind of winding its way through. These hills are moving in that direction. But it's so round and lazy. This just feels kind of easygoing. See what I'm saying? Just in the form of the focus, there is a message. Yeah, exactly. So remember that the flow tells part of the story, the shape of the flow. Yeah. Now here's something that's really near and dear to my heart and that I hope that you will all really think about deeply. Angle and hierarchy. I think everyone understands this at some level, right? If you're looking up at someone, then they are literally above you. You know? They feel superior to you, overbearing if they're, like, evil. And if they're all might, then there's someone you, like, admire. But you're looking up at them. Hierarchy can tell the story too. Who are we looking up at? What are we looking down upon? All of this is to answer the question that hopefully you've all had in the back of your minds. How high should the perspective line be? Not just where it is, but where should we put it? If you put the perspective line very low, that means you're going to be looking up at everything. Let's do this, right? Let's do the 2-point, right? Because the perspective line is so low, everything in this city is towering over us. It's intimidating. If the perspective line is high, you're looking down at everything. Everything here feels little, insignificant. Can anyone try and figure out why the creators of our favorite Disney musical chose the perspective that they chose for this shot? Why aren't we looking up at Belle? We admire Belle, don't we? What is it that we're looking down on? It's not just Belle, is it? It's a little town. It's a quiet village. Every day, like the one before. And there must be more than this provincial life. She feels trapped in here. Nothing important is in this town. She looks down on it, and we look down on it too. Not in the sense of kind of dismaying it exactly, but feeling like it's unimportant, and that she's unimportant because she's there. The feeling created here that we're looking down on Belle is more feeling like she's small and helpless within her situation. Compare that to Miles, right? The skyline is slightly above him. This is slightly above him, but he's literally, right now, in the process of standing up to be equal to the task ahead of him. Look how much we can read into the fact that, like, the heights of these two objects and focuses tell the story. This kind of stuff is happening everywhere in perspective. We can even go back to our original, older examples, the ones that were not as good. Here's another alternate reading of this piece, right? Sure, there's all these other people here, but who's highest in the frame? Who's most important? Who has the frickin' power of love on his side? It's him. He's the only one standing up for what he believes in. All of these, plebes are just sitting in place. The highest face in the entire piece is his. We look up to him. There's another person standing up, but because of perspective, he's much lower in the frame. We can go back to Citizen Kane, I think. This butler guy, he's being towered above by everything else in Citizen Kane's... His name is Citizen Kane. Everything under Kane's house is towering over him. The legacy of Kane towers over him. Now, Kane is dead, so he has some power. He's kind of above, but he cannot overpower everything else in the frame. He's still just a tiny man standing in a great man's shadow. They're using this everywhere. I challenge you guys. Right now, think of any movie you greatly admire that you think is probably doing the good stuff with its composition. And I will pull it up immediately and we will analyze it from this hierarchy perspective. The TLDR is always think about who's high and who's low and what story that's telling. That'll help you figure out your focus. That'll help you figure out the perspective line. It's such an immense, tremendous part of telling the story. Howl's Moving Castle, sure. When the castle first appears and you see it on the hill. Oh yeah, that's the first image that I see here, actually. There's not that much perspective here. Not really. If anything, it's kind of odd, because you look at this person, and they're small. They're close to us. Shouldn't they be large? But that tells us how big the castle is. What is the castle like? What is it over? What's the angle on the castle? Where's the horizon line? It's really hard to tell where the horizon line is here. But this is a perfect example of a picture that's not really using perspective in the way that we were talking about, but it has a great composition. Howl's castle is literally stomping over the village. It's beyond. You can literally slice the piece in two. And what kind of shape language do we have here? So look at the shape language as well, right? This diagonal, it's a lot more interesting than just walking across horizontally. But the castle is literally on an uphill battle for its existence. And yet, it still moves very slowly. This is a pretty horizontal flow. But these houses, oh, look how horizontal they are. This is a sleepy-ass town. So, even without using much perspective, we have a feeling of what this castle represents to all of the people of the town. It's not attacking them, it's walking over them. So disconnected is Howl's life from the lives of all the other people. Let's do another one. Oh god, it's really tiny, but you guys know this scene, right? So, Mr. Incredible is at his day job, and his boss is a real piece of slut. He just doesn't like anything about this work. Hierarchy! Can you see a hierarchy here? So yeah, there's a little bit of a statement going on here about how short this guy is. His vertical shape language versus Mr. Incredible's arch here. He feels rounder and therefore more friendly because of that. But perspective-wise, right? Is there any perspective in this scene? Unlike the last example, I think the answer is yes. We can see on the desk there's this slight little convergence that's pushing us towards the left. But again, we're talking about hierarchy, right? This guy is above the desk. He's practically a part of the desk. They're very similar. Mr. Incredible is the highest thing in the frame. And he looks down on him, but he's also looking down on the desk. Everything about this job is below him, literally and metaphorically. Well, here's another perspective, ever so slightly. And of course, in this scene, I believe, someone gets mugged outside, and the town, right? The greater the outside, the people he wants to protect, that's the only thing that's not just a source of light, but that's equal to Mr. Incredible. The city itself is what he respects. Composition's crazy, isn't it? Does that make sense to you guys? One more from Nausicaa, and then we're gonna move on. Okay, let's try this one then. So, in this image, we see the people of the Valley of the Wind. Nausicaa is up here, fixing this windmill. And you can see that her glider is attached up here too. I wonder, who do you think is the protagonist of the movie? I wonder. But we can go further than this. You can see, remember how we were talking about generalist perspective? So we see these windmills, and they're getting smaller. So I ask you, is that to say that the perspective is this way? Are the convergences over here? No! The convergences are not over there. You can see that this wall is converting over here, as are these steps. The vanishing point is here. What we're seeing with the windmills is a generalist perspective. They know that these things get smaller as they get further, so by doing this, you instantly think, those are far away windmills. So from this we can see that the perspective line here is actually quite low. All of them are looking up at her, but you know what else? All the people of the valley understand that they are dwarfed by the importance of nature, right? Humanity underneath nature. This shot is all about the relationship of the valley to its surroundings and how humanity and greenery intersect and feel better, you know? So those are a few, just a few quick overviews of hierarchy in composition. Think about hierarchy. My god, it's so important. One. Oh, Dan, I just saw the Attack on Titan poster on your wall. See Eren looking up at the colossal Titan. Yes, exactly. So Eren is going to take down this giant Titan. The wall... Who's higher, the top of the wall or the head of the Titan? Think about that. But yeah, you're going to start seeing it everywhere. You're welcome. Now, Shinxy earlier brought up this question. Exactly, because the wall can't hold back no Titan. So Shinxy brought up this question earlier, and I'm really sad that she had to go, but what happens if the vanishing points are on the top and bottom? Well, what do we mean when we're talking about a vanishing point, right? We're trying to answer the question of, where do these lines go? Love this stuff's like a secret language. Well, yeah, it is. It's not a secret, but it is a language, the language of composition. It's a storytelling language. So earlier we've got this vertical line, and this is where the left lines go, and this is where the right lines go. So here's a question. You remember how when we talked about one-point perspective and how these lines are always horizontal, and that's kind of the weakness? Well, there's a similar weakness to two-point perspective. This line is always vertical. So, what if we had another vanishing point that tells us where these lines go? So this line goes up to there, and these lines go over to here, and these lines go over to there, and now you have, tall-ass building, a three-point perspective. If you're looking way up at something, or way down at something, a three-point perspective is sometimes useful. Does that make sense? Now, just like with the other systems, we can generalize. You can generalize and say, okay, well, as things approach the top, they converge. So I don't really need to do the three-point perspective to know that if I really want to, and I'm doing like some kind of a, I don't know, maybe a bridge. Let's make a bridge. This stuff kind of moves together in some way. It's got a two-point perspective here. It's got a three-point perspective there. And these vertical lines, I'm going to have them kind of converge somewhere up there. And now I feel like I have a three-point perspective, even though I'm not really thinking too hard about it. Now, this wasn't exactly what Shinxy asked. She says, what if you have it on the top and the bottom? This is very, very rare and somewhat difficult. But you can, in fact, imagine some kind of object which converges both at the bottom and at the top. Is your mind starting to explode? Mine definitely is. Like, think about the last time you saw any object that looked like this outside of an MC Escher drawing, right? Like, we're getting into really weird territory here. But yes, that's what I'm getting at. It's like a fisheye lens. What is a fisheye lens? We need to talk a little bit about lenses, in fact, because that's the next thing on our list. A lens is a way of seeing the world, capturing it, right? There are different kinds of lenses, and they capture the world in different ways. A telephoto lens, a very long lens, will capture a very small part of the world. And that small part is going to be very flat. Let's say that we have a bunch of trees here, right? Tree, 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 tree. Tree, 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 tree. And I don't know, a temple. Okay? A telephoto lens, all the trees are going to seem almost the same size. There's not going to be very much depth here. There's almost no perspective. Telephoto lens captures very little. But you know what's going to happen is there is going to be a lot of blurring. Perhaps you've heard of the idea of depth of field. We all understand focusing our eyes, right? You focus on a certain thing. There is a plane of focus, in fact. You focus on one thing and everything else is out of focus. A telephoto lens will have a very shallow depth of field, meaning a lot of things are going to be out of focus. I said that this is advanced stuff, but keep in mind that if you want to direct the eye with composition, I don't want you to look here, so I'm going to put that part out of focus, right? This stuff is in focus, this stuff is out of focus, so I'm going to make these trees blurry, you know? But note how this is usually like a close-up type thing. You're going to use telephotos for like looking at a glass, right? Maybe the glass here, very close up, you know, like a foodie type of picture, right? Almost no perspective, just like we were talking about. This stuff can be in focus, and everything else in the background can be out of focus. Hard not to know where you're supposed to look in this composition, right? Now, a normal, quote-unquote normal camera, a wide-angle camera, is going to capture a lot more of those trees and temples. This is where you're going to get some kind of perspective, right? Maybe you get some other trees in the background. And in a wide-angle situation, the depth, the plane of field, the plane of focus, is going to be a lot wider, too. A lot of things are going to be in focus here. But you guys weren't asking about wide-angle and telephoto lenses. You were asking about the famous fisheye lens. The fisheye lens is capturing everything around here. You've got your trees, you've got your temple, but it's also going to get these trees, it's going to get the street, it's going to get everything. Do you see what I'm getting at here? These three different lenses approaching the same subject, changing how it looks. Now, you don't often see fisheye lenses in general because it's distracting, because it has to curve light to get that wide angle. But sometimes you will want to have that kind of perspective. So how do you do a 4-point perspective? Well, a fisheye lens curves, right? So you can think of it like all these lines converge, like so. And that means that anything that you draw is going to follow some of these lines. We got a box, okay. Well, this side goes to there, that side goes to here, The verticals curve like that. Incidentally, you'll notice that these are curving inwards. So what's the story there? Well, that's another point. Look, now we have a 5-point perspective. Yeah, trippy is the word. And that's why I say it's kind of like distracting. Because why is it trippy? Because our eyes, naturally, are wide-angle lenses. They are not fisheyes. We're seeing stuff that you really shouldn't be... You wouldn't see naturally. You need a lens to see images like this. So when our brain sees this image, it's not natural. And we have to spend some time thinking about, what am I seeing? Like, what am I looking at? But here is the big reason to me why I don't want to emphasize the fisheye lens usually. So, where are we looking at? What's the focus and flow in this picture? Anyone? Exactly. It's trippy, it's weird. It's not the natural way our eyes see. It's kind of here, because everything is converging there, but that's kind of the point. I think that 4 and 5 point perspectives, they're sort of gimmicky because there's only so much storytelling potential, right? You can see like this whole area, and if that's the story, great. Like, I feel overwhelmed and it's kind of trippy. That's a story, sure. But they're just so much effort, and they don't really bring as much to the table as a 2-point perspective, or even a 3-point. So for that reason, like, you can know that this exists, but I don't really think... There are very rarely strong reasons to use this kind of composition. Okay? Now here's the last and perhaps the most important part of the lesson for all of you character people. Perspective and you. When you're drawing a picture of people, I bet most of you just kind of draw them like this. So, tell me, where is the horizon line here? And you say, I can't tell you where the horizon line is, there's no convergence. Well, yeah, I guess not. Kind of boring, isn't it? But more to the point, by doing this, you're not really taking a stance on who this character is, you're not establishing a hierarchy in terms of them and their surroundings. You're not even showing us whether we're looking up or down at them, unless you do something like showing the bottom of the chin, as if he is looking down on us, or vice versa, of course. And maybe you want to go more extreme than this. Maybe you really want to look down on this character. Right? You want to make clear that they are, like, helpless in their situation. Or whatever, like that. This is definitely using some kind of perspective. You want to look down at a character. You want to look up at a character. Whatever it may be. You can tell a story of a character you're drawing through the perspective that you're seeing them. How do we apply that to your character drawing? Well, remember what we said. We can break down images. We can break down objects into their simplest primitive forms. So let's say you want to look down on so-and-so person for whatever reason. Well, let's just make a square. You're looking down on him, so the perspective line is going to be very high. And maybe with 3-point perspective, we are going to have these lines converge downwards. Okay, so this is where our person is going to be. Their head is going to be up here somewhere. You know, you can do the breakdowns. The waist is going to be a little bit smaller than the shoulders. The pelvis smaller than that, and the shoes are very small indeed. And now you have a bit of a story in that perspective. See what I'm getting at? This is the iconic example, right? Persona 3. This is the art that got everyone so riled up. Look at the characters. Can you see something interesting about them? They aren't standing straight up, and we're not looking straight at them. Hey everybody, what kind of perspective system is this using? Exactly, it's got that fisheye thing going for it. So here's one example of an instance where that might be useful. Feels kind of trippy, doesn't it? You're really drawn into this scene, but here are some other reasons why it makes sense. Both of these are pushing us into the protagonist. All of this is pushing us in towards the protagonist. And just the fact that no one uses this perspective very often makes it so fascinating. These lines push us in towards Thanatos, etc. But just focus on the characters and you'll realize that they're standing in perspective too. We can break them down if we want. Is the creature in perspective? It seems out of place. I don't think that Thanatos is out of perspective exactly. It's just that he's such a strange figure, especially in this concept art. It's kind of hard to know what you're seeing. You just you can feel, oh, this is some kind of a face. This is some kind of a hand. I don't really know what else is going on there. Having seen Thanatos from the side, I think what we're looking at is something like this, right? He's got that. He's leaning in really hard. There's a lot of... You can't see this arm, but it's coming forward. Same with the leg. He's got these coffins. TLDR is, I don't think this is out of perspective, it's just kind of a weird shape. There's a lot of foreshortening going on because we're looking down at him. This brings us nicely to our next use, perhaps the final part of the class, right? Perspective on body portions. I know all of your favorite parts of drawing people is the foreshortening. It's going to be now because you aren't going to have to worry about it so much when you can sort of figure out what's going wrong and how to fix it. Say that I want this guy's hand to come forward to us. Well, what are we really doing? We're creating a kind of perspective to just start with a 1-point perspective, right? Here's the upper arm, here's the lower arm, I guess. Now you still have to, draw hands and stuff like that. But now you have like a starting point. We talked a little bit about this last week in volumes, but if you can break somebody down into these primitive shapes, then you can also do perspective on any of those shapes. Leg, right? A lot of perspective there. Even the hand, maybe it's coming in towards us. And you might at first think, right, but none of these are like converging or whatever. Right, because they're just on one person. They're not going to go all the way to the edge. So remember some of our generalist tips, right? These things converge. They get smaller as they go into the distance. This part will get smaller. Maybe I want him to throw the arm back. Now I have this arm getting smaller. Okay. So, does that make some sense? Basically, what I'm saying is that you can use perspective and these basic shapes to help figure out body poses, weird angles, all that kind of stuff. Let's quickly review here. The most important part within composition and perspective is composition. Composition is creating and manipulating flow to tell a story. In order to create and manipulate a flow, you need a focus and you need a direction. Having symmetry creates a situation without direction, which is not very conducive to storytelling. This leads us to the use of the rule of thirds as the simplest, most easiest way to create direction. Keep in mind that direction doesn't just have to be on a flat axis, it can be with depth. In order to show depth, we use perspective. Perspective creates depth to serve the composition. We have a bunch of different kinds. Isometric perspective is perhaps the easiest and most intuitive to get, but it's also not very good for moving our attention because nothing converges. One-point perspective can help with a lot of things converging, but it doesn't give us information on the horizontals. Two-point perspective, then, is perhaps the most versatile of the different kinds for moving our eye to where we want to be. You can pare down all of these perspective tips into general ideas that don't necessarily require you to know perspective, but can allow you to create these compositions. Even something as simple as making sure your horizontal lines slant a little can allow you to create the impression of a space. Finally, there are a few things to consider when it comes to perspective. Shape, language, and mood. Basically, the idea that the form that your flow takes helps tell that story and creates a tone. Angle and hierarchy. The idea that however high or low the objects in the composition are tells something about their relationship to each other, helps tell that story. There are higher perspective points, particularly 3-point perspective is useful for establishing height or depth. If you go higher than 3-point, you approach a 5-point perspective, which imitates the effects of a fisheye lens. This is, in many senses, a little bit over the top and has very limited uses. But you can place characters that you create in a perspective space and use what we've talked about to give the characters more depth, tell more of their story, and indeed help you out with things like foreshortening and posing. And I think that wraps up the day. Thanks so much for attending. But for the moment, that's pretty much it. We're going to be back tomorrow with some background commission work if you'd like to return. Until then, I encourage you to try and look for all of these things in the background compositions you see. Feel free always to show me the backgrounds that you try to create. I'm happy to give you encouragement and hopefully help you out a little bit. Until then, let's go raid Rinri. Say hi, Mifune. Say hi to the chat. You ate my hair tie this morning, didn't you? Didn't you? You have no regrets. You just went for it. Crazy cat.